Thank you, Vishal. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to Dynamics GP Accounts Receivable webinar. First, we'll begin looking at setups. Let me just share my screen with you all. Good. So first, we'll be looking at setups within the accounts receivable area. And accounts receivable falls under sales, which is a wider area, as we would see during today's training. And if we were to go to receivables on the setup, here you would see where your agent buckets are defined. And in GP, I believe it's like 6 or 7 agent buckets, 7 agent buckets that we are allowed to define in our reports. 4 of these buckets print on our agent report. So if you would need to define these additional 3 buckets and you need them to print on your agent reports, that could be done for you. It's a minor customization. To the right, we have the password area. So for instance, we have exceed credit limit. So if a customer is over credit limit and I enter a document for that customer, I may be allowed to enter, but when I'm ready to save that document, I will be prompted for a password. And this is where the passwords are specified by administrators of the system. So one is exceeding credit limit. The other is if you put a customer on hold and that hold, a user wants to remove that hold, again, someone only with the administrator password that is defined here can do that. If write-off limits are defined and finance charges are defined, then you also have passwords for those areas. When you are applying payments, you can automatically apply by due date or document date. Of course, the user can decide how they want to apply. These are just defaults here. And these are some of the other options or settings. Important for us would be whether you want to be able to print a historical a trial balance. This is always selected. Yes. If you have printed a document, so a user is entering a document to a batch, it has been saved, and they print that document, do you want to allow the user to delete? In some instances, some of my clients choose to disallow delete, which then forces the user to void that document. And voiding the document leaves an audit trail in the system of that document, whereas deletion, there's no trail. If you're using finance charges and commission, there are some settings here as well. And if you're using taxes, what is important on a newer version of GP, I believe it's GP 2018, the display over credit limit icon has been added and warn if customer over credit. I believe this was here before, so there's a display icon which you'll see through the training. You can also set your default checkbook, price level, and invoice format. Now, if we were to go into the options area, here you basically set what you want your next number to be. So if we're doing a sales invoice, what your next number should be. Not necessarily just when you're starting off the system, but if any reason you want to revise your numbering, you're already using this area and you want to revise your number, and it can be done here from receivable setup option. Also, these documents are given names when the user goes into the screen to carry out your data entry. If you want to rename or use a different terminology, you can type it in here. So when the user goes to enter data, they will see whatever naming conventions that you have input here as the administrator. There's some user-defined fields here, 2 for customer master and 2 for customer address. If you are going to capture any information for the customer or the address, if you want to capture, that fields are not already defined in GP. So you have 2 for master and 2 for address. If we go to classes, and let me just explain the importance of classes. Classes are important really for reporting. So you group your customers. Let's say you might have grouping such as local and foreign customers, or you might have grouping based on the type of service you give to the customer, or based on the type of products you sell to the customer, depending on the nature of your business. And then by those groupings, let's say you're reporting on your entire accounts receivable, you can then zero in and report on classes on the accounts receivable. And at the class level, you have some settings you can define, whether the client is open item or balance forward. Generally, most of our clients will use open item because balance forward basically summarizes your customer data and only shows you open balance for, let's say, the most recent month. Most people would want to see all of the details, hence we keep open item. If finance charges are used, you can see what the percentage or the amount is being used to apply. A finance charge would be if a customer, let's say you give 30 days credit limit and they're over the credit limit, GP can assign a finance charge, which means GP will create an invoice on that customer account once you run your finance charge utility, which should be monthly. So it's an automated process. You can set minimum payments to be received from this customer or from this class of customers. So you could have no minimum, a percentage, or again, an amount. Credit limits are important. Different customers, you may want to define different credit limits, or you may decide this grouping of customer, no credit or unlimited credit. Here you have an example, 20,000 has been set as the amount. And if I were to click the expansion, we can further define if the sum of 31 days or an older period like 91 to 120 days exceeds a certain amount, then that customer is over the credit limit. If we're using salespersons and territories, that can be defined here, as well as default payment terms, default tax schedules, and shipping methods. Also important, and this is still at the class level, what are the GL accounts that you want to define for this grouping of customers? So if the GL accounts vary from customer to customer, then you may choose not to define at the overall class level, but you define at the customer level. Now, if you do define all of these options here, as well as the accounts at the class level, it makes data entry a lot easier for your users, because when your user adds a new customer to the system, they select the class that they're adding, all of that information rolls down from the class. And of course, the user can change whichever of the information they don't need to keep, they can change that information as well. Let's look at customer maintenance, which is the area where we would set up customers. And if we were to look at this customer Iran Fits, notice there's a warning next to the customer. So this icon is new, that was added in GP 2018. And if I were to hover on the icon or click on the icon, I should see that this customer has exceeded their credit limit. Right, this is where we specify the customer ID, name, statement name. Here is where we specify the class the customer belongs to. So if we choose to define classes, here is where we specify, and all the information from the class rolls down to the customer. So for instance, when we just look at class ID, we looked at options, and it's more or less the same options are here. That would be rolled down to this customer ID. And we look at accounts, and the same GL accounts would be rolled down to this customer ID. And we can change as we need to, as I mentioned. Each customer can have multiple addresses. So usually on the face of customer maintenance or the face of the customer card, we specify what is the primary or the main address. Then for additional addresses, we go to the address button and we clear and we simply add whatever new address we want to and save. If we were to look at this customer, if I were to browse, we see this customer has primary address and warehouse address. So 2 addresses specified. The user-defined fields I mentioned, here are the 2 user-defined fields on the address level. And here are two user-defined fields on the customer level. As you would notice, one is in use. One field has been name type. Now, a customer may have multiple addresses. So for instance, if we look at ship to, we are shipping to the warehouse. We're billing to primary, which would be probably their head office, and statements are going to primary. So you can specify different address IDs for different purposes. And also your default payment terms. If we were to go to the email button, so the email functionality is here in GP and has been here for a number of years. And over the different versions of GP, more and more function has been added, meaning more and more documents can be emailed out to customers. And not just to customers when we're talking about AR, but throughout GP, more and more documents can be emailed, whether within the organization or outside of the organization. So here, we're looking at receivables. So here you're seeing all the different types of customers that can be emailed out. Very important for us would be the customer statement, sales invoice or receivables invoice. And if you're using quotes and orders and returns, those are important as well. If you would notice under the format section, one of mine setting is set to PDF, one is set to XPS, one to HTML. And if Word is enabled within GP, you can also email out in a Word document. So you come to this window to specify which of your document types you want to be able to email out to customers. Now, on back to my customer maintenance window, if you would notice to the top right, there is a parent customer ID. So let me browse. Aaron Fitz is the first customer on my list. Let me browse another one. Let's select the second customer. So I'm now under Adam Park. If you would notice, parent customer ID says Aaron Fitz. If I were to browse to the next customer, to advance, parent customer ID also says Aaron Fitz. If I continue browsing, parent customer ID is blank for my other customers. So I have specified in GP, I'm going to show you where I specified. I have specified in GP that advance is a child to the parent Aaron Fitz. What that means, let's say Aaron Fitz is a group company and advance falls under that group. What it means is that statements can all go to Aaron Fitz if we specify it to be like that in GP. And receipts from Aaron Fitz could be dispersed between Aaron Fitz's account, advanced, and Adam Park. Now, what I'm explaining to you about parent and child customer is totally optional in GP. You don't have to use parent customer. It only depends on if it's applicable to your business type. So I'm going to come out of the customer maintenance window, and still under cards, I'm going to go to national accounts. And national accounts is where I define and where you will define who is the parent and who are the child customer IDs. So here I've defined Aaron Fitz as the parent and Adam Park and Advance are the child customer IDs. I've simply browsed and added them and saved this information. Notice there's a setting allow receipt entry for children of the national accounts. And what that means is receipts can be entered to Aaron Fitz and it could be dispersed between these two, or they can be entered directly to Adam Park and directly to Advance, meaning receipts can come directly from these customers. It doesn't always have to come from Aaron Fitz. And this is a simple setting here where you specify national accounts. If you do have scenarios where you need to issue refund checks to some of your customers, so let's say there may be overpayments on their account and you want to issue refund checks to them. The refund check is processed on the payable side of GP. But what you can do here is you can specify that customer vendor relationship. So for instance, you may have a customer ID for your particular customer, but you have never made a payment to that customer. So therefore no vendor ID exists in GP. You simply bring up your customer and let GP create that vendor ID for you. So GP is going to create the entire vendor card for you using information from your customer card. Right? So it's kind of automating that creation of the vendor without the user actually having to go and input vendor information. All right, so let's look at transaction entry. In this case, receivables invoice entry. Now, before I go into receivables invoice entry, let me just explain invoicing in GP. So as I mentioned, when I came to the sales area, sales is a much broader area than just accounts receivable. We're looking at accounts receivable in detail this morning, but in terms of invoicing and what can be achieved under sales and the invoicing that we're going to look at, we're going to look at the receivables transaction entry, which is a more simplistic invoice. However, under sales, we can also achieve two other types of invoicing. So if I were to go higher up under my transaction area, the sales transaction entry, right? As you can see, this window has a lot more information. So if I select, and by the way, this is the same window where we'll enter quotes, transfer that quote to order, fulfill, invoice, and we can enter returns as well. So if I were to go to invoice and look up in my system, there should be some existing invoices, right? So these are examples of invoices here in the demo company. As you can see, these are what I refer to as multi-line invoices. So there are several lines of invoices coming down, whereas the standard receivable invoice, which I'm going to go into just now, basically it's just a short description you'll have. You don't have all of these lines coming down, right? So it depends on what you want to achieve in your invoicing. Another difference would be, of course, these invoices, these multi-line invoices link to item numbers, which means it links to the inventory module within your system. So when you're selling something, it draws that amount out of your quantities available in inventory based on the item you have selected and of course based on the site that you selected. So sales transaction entry is heavily integrated and intertwined with your inventory module. All right. Whereas the receivables invoice, the receivables transaction entry is not intertwined with inventory at all. So this is a highly summarized invoice that you would enter, and it's more for servicing or for items that you would not be tracking in your inventory. Now, outside of these two types of invoices I just showed you, which is your receivables invoice and your sales invoice, if we were to look at the middle section under transactions and sales, we'll also see an area called invoice entry and invoicing batches. Invoice entry, let me see if I have one in the system. Yes. So invoice entry looks a lot like the sales transaction entry we just looked at with the multi-lines coming down. And as you can see, it's also linked to inventory in GP, where you see you can select your item numbers where you want to sell from. And by the way, you don't have to select item numbers. You can type in line items, which mean you input in non-inventory items or a service that you want to sell or some miscellaneous item. The difference between the invoice entry screen and the sales transaction entry screen, they look very similar. The difference being here, as you would notice, currency ID is grayed out. So we do not use invoice entry if we are using multi-currency invoicing. It means if we are invoicing in currencies other than what our system or our functional currency is. Most of the other features from sales transaction entry exist here. Major difference being we don't input a currency ID. So we always invoice in our system currency. So now we're going to the little more simplistic version, the accounts receivable invoice, which is under transaction entry. Before I go to accounts receivable invoice, let me just mention, and this doesn't only apply to accounts receivable, but throughout GP, we can achieve transaction level posting, batch level posting, or series level posting. So just to explain what that is. If I were to go into transaction entry and input my information here for my receivables invoice, I wouldn't be allowed to save. And I wouldn't be allowed to save because I do not have a batch ID. It means that I'm transaction level posting, or I am going to be updating the system real time. So I enter my invoice and I post. That's all I can do. I can enter and post. I cannot save the batch. I cannot exit this window and come back and review the invoice because I'm transaction level posting. However, if I select created or selected a batch ID, so I can do so even before coming to transaction entry, I can go to receivable batches, create my batch, and then come to this window, and then I'll select, okay, I want to associate with this batch that I just created. So if I were doing batch level entry, it means that I'm going to be doing batch level posting. So I enter my invoice and I save. It saves to that batch ID. I can enter another one and save to that batch ID, and I could create as many invoices I want. And I may have a batch ID for the day, or I may have a few batch IDs for the day, depending on the volume and the regularity of my transactions. And saving to a batch enables me to come back into the transaction, review the transaction, make changes to the transaction, etc. And when everything is accurate, I then post the batch. So if there were 10 invoices in my batch, I post the batch, which means I then post my 10 invoices. So that is transaction entry posting, batch level posting, sorry, transaction level posting, batch level posting. And then we have series posts. And series posts is available on the most of the modules in GP. So it's also there under payables as well. So if I were to go to series posts, basically, I will see all of the batches from under the sales area. So not just receivables, but sales as well. And all of the batches available for posting, right? And then I can select multiple batches and post at the same time instead of one batch at a time. Okay, if you're gonna be doing series posting and the batches have a large number of transactions in them, which means when you select multiple batches to post, you might be posting, let's say, hundreds of transactions at a time. It depends on it's important to know the time of day that you're going to be posting, because if other users on GP and there's heavy traffic on GP or heavy traffic on your network, then if you're going to be doing that multi-batch posting, you might want to schedule it for early morning or later in the afternoon. Okay, so I'm going to create a batch and enter a transaction. So I'll go to receivables batches. Right, so we input a batch ID. The system doesn't give us a batch ID. You input a batch ID, and usually I might use my initial and the date. Right, and we want to enter transaction entry, not at the stage of cash receipt, the transaction entry being either an invoice or a credit note. Now, even though we enter an invoice or credit note, GP does allow us to also enter payment on that invoice. So just in case there's a payment we're going to enter, we have to capture a checkbook ID as well. Whether it's going to be used or it wouldn't be used for the entry, we still have to capture that checkbook ID. And then once I click transaction, it takes me to my receivables transaction entry screen, which is the window where we can enter invoices, debit memos, credit memos, returns, or service. So Once I tab, the system will give me the next available number. And remember that this number is pulling from that first window that we went to, which was the receivables setup window. Of course, we verify we have our accurate date. And at customer ID, I'm going to select Aaron Fitz. Now, once I tab out of here, which means I confirmed Aaron Fitz, notice I get the warning, which is telling me that this customer exceeds their credit limit. I'll then enter sales amount. Now, as I tab, this customer has been set up to use a certain tax schedule. So as I tab past the fields, notice the tax came up automatically. If I wanted to edit that tax or change that tax in some way, I go to the expansion button and I select a different tax schedule, or I can delete the tax altogether if I wanted to. Also, under this customer, a salesperson has been set up, and with a salesperson, a commission rate has been set up. So if I were to go to the commissions button, I will see that Paul W has been set up as the salesperson. I'll see the territory and I'll see the commission rate. So once I go to distribution, the commission will also be calculated. So we'll see our invoice distribution, we'll see our tax distribution, and we'll see commission distribution. Right? So I go to distribution here, and these are our entries. We see in tax accounts are being affected, sales, receivables, and commission accounts are being affected. Now, to make it a little easier, what I'm going to do is remove the tax. I'm also going to remove the commission. Right? And the reason I've done that is because I'm going to make a payment on this invoice. So this invoice for $450, I'm going to import either cash or a check payment. And it means that our distributions are going to change. So just so that it's clearer to you how the distributions are updated, I remove all of the other items. So let's say we are invoicing, but we're also entering our receipt at the same time. So the invoice is $450. We have received $450 from the customer as well. So it's called a simultaneous invoice and receipt entry. So two entries are happening in the same screen, the invoice and the receipt. We confirm our checkbook and our cash receipt number defaults from the system as the next number. Now, when I go to distribution, the distribution may have not been updated as yet. Remember, I made some changes and I removed tax and commission. So what I simply do is click default and delete so that it updates. So now we're seeing the entries are not going to receivable as it was before. We're seeing an amount crediting sales, an amount going to our cash account and our checkbook. Right? So the entire invoice amount is being paid and it's going to go to the checkbook. So in actuality, two transactions have been created here, both an invoice and a receipt. So this entry has been saved to batch. I'll save the entry. And when we want to post the entry, we have to go to the batch as well. So we'll go to receivables batch. Now, before we post the entry, I'm going to go to inquiry, transaction by customer. I did not take note of my invoice number. I remember the amount. So hopefully you'll be able to find our invoice. So what we're doing here is we're looking for the information that we just entered, which was an invoice and a receipt entry simultaneously. Now, when you're looking for the information, you can search by document number, by date, to zero in on your information. You can sort on the window by document number, amount, etc. Besides these two bits of information where you can filter or sort by, there's also the section that says include work, open, or history. So I'll just explain what is work, open, and history. Work means transactions have been saved to a batch and they have not yet been posted. Remember, my transaction was just saved to a batch and it wasn't posted as yet. So therefore, I should find my transaction under the work status. Open means transactions have been entered and posted, and they may have been applied. And even though they may have been fully applied, they still remain in that open status. So open status shows us what has been posted in accounts receivable. History would be those same transactions from the open status, which are posted transactions that have been, one, fully applied, and two, our month-end process of paid transaction removal has been run, and therefore that process takes those fully applied documents, whether it's invoices or payments or credits, and move them from that open status to historical status. And that's when they get the history. Now, that is on the accounts receivable side. On the accounts payable side, the open and history function is a little bit different in that in accounts payable, automatically, once transactions have been fully applied, the system moves them to history. In accounts receivable, the user needs to run that process monthly to remove them to historical status. So I'm looking for work transaction, so I'll select work only and redisplay. And here is my invoice for 450, right? So here's my entry for the 450. So we're going to go to the batch, receivables batches. I'm going to look for that batch that I created, batch 10, right? And once I tab from batch ID and origin, I see that if I look at my control and actual area, my batch total area, I see that there's one transaction for a total of 450, which would be the transaction that I entered. I can go ahead and post that transaction. It's always recommended that before posting your batches that you print your edit lists, and your edit list will show you if you have any errors that you need to rectify before you go to the posting stage. So I'll just print my edit list to screen. Okay, and my edit list basically shows more or less all of the information that was captured on my entry. And I'm not seeing any errors flagged on my edit list. It means that I can go ahead and post. I'll just print the sales posting journal. Okay, so similar to my edit list, this information captures the information that I entered on screen. However, because it's a posting journal that we have entered the posting process, it also shows me some information at the top of the screen. I'm seeing my audit trail code, which wouldn't have been there before on the edit list because the audit trail code is assigned at the point of posting. So I'm seeing my audit trail code here, and this audit trail code is what I will locate in the general ledger once my batch has finished posting. So once my batch is finished posting, it goes to the general ledger for someone else to review and post. Just a note that there are settings in GP, whether when you post from receivables or payables, you want your batches to go to GL for someone to post again to update the GL, or whether you want to update GL directly when you post from receivables or payables. In my case, my setting is set to send a batch to GL. So once this is completed, I'm going to look for this audit trail or batch ID in the general ledger. Okay, so that posting is complete. And if I were to go to my general ledger and batches, now I remember it started with RMSLS and it was batch number 10. So the GL actually takes the total debit and credit. So while we see it's still a one transaction, the batch total is now 900. It's 450 plus 450. And if I were to click on transaction, I will see my entry here, which of course is a summarized version of my entry because it's now capturing just GL information or general ledger information. And I'll take note of this journal number 3547. So I'm going to go ahead and post this batch in the general ledger, at which stage our GL will also become updated. Good. So this is our journal. Now that both our subledger, which is accounts receivables, and our general ledger has been updated, if I were to browse the general ledger to look for that information that came from the invoice, I should be able to find it. So there's more than one way that I can look. I can go to inquiry financial summary or detail and look up one of the GL accounts that were affected. Or I could go to journal entry inquiry and I could either look up or type in the journal number that was captured. So this was the journal that was captured, 3547. And if we were to look now, we are seeing a blue underline or what we call a link field, which is source document. And if I were to click that link field, so remember I'm in the general ledger now when I'm looking up journal 3547. And if I were to click source document, it takes me back to that original entry. Of course, it's in a view only form because the entry has already been posted. And it takes me back to that entry and I can get all details from that entry, all the distribution information, commission, any apply information, etc. So I'm going back to our sales area. And in sales, I had our transaction by customer inquiry window minimized. And if I were to refresh, because when we were last in this window, I was looking for my work documents, but since then I've posted. So if I were to refresh, my 450 entry is now no longer in this view because I'm only looking at work. So let's look at open and redisplay. And here is my 450 entry, which of course I could drill to. All right, so I can drill back to my entry from here as well, from customer inquiry. All right, let's talk a little bit about month-end processing. So month-end processing would be done under your sales area and under routines. And some of our clients are actually not aware that you have to do month-end processing and are not aware of the importance of it. So let's discuss that a bit. So if you have documents from customers, let's say with small overpayments on them, it could be due to a foreign currency difference or some other reason. And so there are small balances, and therefore when you print your aging or your customer or your receivables age trial balance, you have all of these small balances showing up when really and truly those customers should not even show up on your aging because their balance should be zero. Then what you can do, and by the way, I mentioned month-end processing, but write-off of documents could be done either month-end or it could probably even be done annually. It's up to you. So you can write off overpayments or underpayments, and you can write off up to a certain amount. So you can have a certain limit and you just process that. And all of your customers within your range, either you select all or you select a range of customers, will be processed. In case you are not certain of, okay, what documents will be picked up by this process, what you can do is you can preview before. So let's say, let me look for customers with overpayments. Right, and I can set my write-off limit to, in fact, it should be underpayments. Can set my write-off limit to $10. I'll select a small range. I'm not sure if I'll pick up anything. and I'll preview. Okay, so none were found in this range. Let me select my entire customer list. I may find something. Good. So we have picked up 4 customers with amounts for write-off, small amounts for write-off based on the write-off limit that I've input here. And so we can decide if we go in ahead to write off for these 4 customers, or we could uncheck some of them, right? And once you have finished your preview, you can go ahead and process, right? I'll cancel here. So that is one way of carrying out write-offs. I'll show you another way shortly. And then there's aging. So there's write-offs, which can be done monthly, every 3 months, every 6 months, maybe annually. Aging, however, should be done monthly, and paid transaction removal should be done monthly. So aging is simply a process that ensures that your documents are in the correct buckets. So you might have current, which is 0 to 30, then you might have 31 to 60, 61 to 90. So those are your aging buckets or your aging periods. And aging goes through all of your documents and ensures that on reports, they are displayed in your correct aging buckets. And so you can select an aging date. So usually at this stage, I might select my last month end. So we have just finished October, so I might select my October date, and I will select all account types and all customers, but you can select a range if you want to and process. You can print a report as well. The report might be a large report, right? And then here is the very important process. This is your paid transaction removal. And paid transaction removal is very important for this reason. As I mentioned, accounts receivables operates slightly differently from accounts payable. So in accounts payable, if a transaction has been fully paid, an invoice, and you have your payment, if it's a check payment or EFT payment, once those 2 transactions have been fully applied to each other, the system automatically moves them to historical status. In accounts receivable, the system leaves them in an open status. And it means only after your user has run this process, they leave that open status and move to historical status. And there's a reason why accounts receivable functions a little different from accounts payable. The reason being, when you send statements to your customer or when you print your age receivables report or your aging report, there are some of you that may want to see your fully paid documents and your fully applied documents for whatever reason. In fact, maybe internally you don't want to see it, but your customers may want to see it on their statements, right? And so those of you whose customer may want to see, let's say, information from 2 months ago, when you're running this process, then you should use a cutoff date of 2 months ago. And if they are customers, if you have customers who may want to see all of their documents, even though they have been fully paid off since beginning of their account with you, in that case, you would not run this process. But what it means is that your agent report is a lot larger than it needs to be because it's showing customers that have been fully paid. And your statements to customers are a lot larger than it needs to be and a lot more cluttered because it's showing those fully paid documents still on the statements, right? Their balance will be showing a 0, but they'll still show up on your statements. So it's important to run this process. And it's important as well. For this process, you may not want to run as at your most recent month end, but you may want to run it for 1 month end prior to your last month end. And one of the reasons for that being, one, your customers may want to see their recently paid documents still on their statements. And 2, if you do have an issue of bounce check, and you go to account for a bounce check in GP or return check in GP, there's an automated process to deal with that in GP. However, if you run this process and the date of the receipt of that check is later than when you run this process, then you'll have to account for it manually. So then basically you'll have to do a debit memo to account for that return check versus GP handling it automated for you. So that's the reason why when you run pay transaction removal, you may want to run it probably 2 months behind where you are currently. Okay. And then finally, once you have run those processes at month end, you would want to run your statements and send your statements to customers. So let's look at the blank form, which is using a user-defined form. And of course, here you have your different parameters that you can apply to a statement. And I'm going to print in my system, my date is April 2027. So I'm going to print using that date. I already have a date range, sorry, a range of customers, a small range. And if you wanted, you can print for all customers and insert that in your restriction. I'll print a screen. And if emails are turned on for statements, then you can email the statement to customers automatically. As long as email addresses have been assigned to the customers, once you click print, the statements go to those customers automatically. Good. So this is my statement and what my format looks like. And of course, these formats are available within your GP installation. But if you need changes to those changes can be done. So for instance, you may want your logo, or you may want a special note on a statement, or there may be a certain field from GP you want added or removed. That can be done. Right? So we have our description, invoice payment balance, and to the bottom of each customer's report. So this one is a large for Aaron Fitz. Right, so to the bottom of each customer's report, you should see the agent buckets as well, and what is owed in each of those agent buckets. Right, and within GP, there are actually several statement formats that you can choose from. So I selected what we call a user definable form, and there are different formats that you can choose and print whichever suits your need the most. All right, let's take a look at SmartList and what reports are available. Okay, so in SmartList, our reports for receivables will be under the sales folder. And of course, as I mentioned, sales is a much broader area, which could be linked to inventory. So under sales line items and sales transaction, you have a lot of options of many reports here out of the box. And of course, these reports, you can take them and make them your own. You can filter and then save as your favorite in the system. We are looking at receivables. So let's look at receivables transactions. And under receivables transactions, there are several out-of-the-box reports, and similarly, you can take these and make your own as well. So for instance, we have past due customer transactions. Right, and then we can take that out to Excel. We have this month's sales, receivables due today. So if you're looking at receivables due today, then you decide who you're going to be calling up today. Right, and as I said, you can make changes to these, so you can add columns to these reports. And once you add, you can then save it as a favorite, give it your name. And then that parameter will always be there. If we wanted a list of customers, we can get that information as well, right? And we can take that out to Excel. Any of these reports, we can take out to Excel, to Word, or we can print. All right, so this is our list in Excel here. Now, we were looking at one report, which was receivables due today. If I were to go on my home page, notice I have customers over credit limit and receivables due today. So on each user's homepage, whichever of these reports are important to them can be set as reminders. So when they enter GP, they'll be able to see their report and they'll actually see an icon like this, which is a Q. And once it's selected, it takes the user to the SmartList report. So for instance, this user will then know which customers they have to focus on calling up today for collection of receivables. All right, so that can be set on each user homepage, depending on what the user's role is. Then we can decide, well, or you can decide which reports you want to set as reminders. All right, there's one other feature I wanted to mention to you, and this feature has been added on the newer versions of GP. It was added in either GP 2016 or GP 2018. So under the utilities area, there is customer combiner and modifier feature. So I'm pretty sure those of you who have been using sales and receivables over, let's say over 2 years, or for a number of years, you would have instances where more than one customer was created in a system, but really they are supposed to be under one customer ID, right? So in error, more than one customer was created. In that case, you would want to use customer combiner and specify which of the customer IDs you're keeping and which of the IDs you want subsumed into the main customer ID. And in making that change, all of the transactions or balances that are with the customer IDs you don't want to keep all move across to the customer ID that you select that you do want to keep, right? So you can use this tool to clean up your customer list. And then there's the customer, so that's customer combiner. Then there's the customer modifier feature. So you may have a set convention in Dynamics GP for what customer IDs you want to use. But at some point in time, maybe error in data entry, or maybe a user being unaware, may have entered a customer ID that is actually not in keeping with your convention. And therefore, you need to modify those customer IDs. And this tool enables you to modify those IDs as well. All right, now this combiner modify feature is only to be used by administrators and accounts receivable and with the assistance of your system administrator. All right, there's one remaining feature I wanted to show you. And because we look at invoicing and we looked at entering a receipt directly on the invoice, but of course, in most instances, you would enter receipt after an invoice has gone out because you'll be receiving payment after. So again, we can create a batch or we can go directly to receipt entry without having a batch, right? So we select our customer. We can enter amount that we have received. And then we go about and decide how we're going to apply. Remember, this customer is a little different in that this customer is a parent to two other customers. So we can decide if we're applying it to this parent account or to one of their accounts, which is the national account. I'm going to leave it on the parent account and I'm going to go to apply, right? So the documents available to be paid against are here, right? And then I can select, okay, I'm paying this invoice for 428, which means there would be a balance of $72. Now, I did mention when we were speaking about write-off earlier, where we looked at that write-off process, where you can run it monthly, quarterly, etc. There's also the ad hoc write-offs that a user can perform. So for instance, let's say I applied to this invoice and on another invoice, right? On another invoice, remember there was only $72 remaining now. And so on this invoice, I apply the $72. there's $56 remaining. Let's say I wanted to, of course, in reality, we wouldn't write off $56, right? If there's a small balance, we might write that off, right? But just to give you an example, so the remaining balance, I'm writing it off. So for instance, when your users are applying receipts to invoices, if they are small balances, instead of leaving those small balances lingering in the system and on your aging reports and on your statements, the user can have the ability to write off small amounts based on settings you're specified in GP when they're applying the payment. So they apply the payment and they write off small amounts immediately at the same time. Okay, so that's just the example of your cash receipt. All right, and so that is the last area that I wanted to show you under accounts receivables. And there's one more actually that is important. It's the age trial balance report or your customer aging report. So in GP, you have the A trial balance, you have the A trial balance with options, and the historical A trial balance. So the historical A trial balance is usually printed if, let's say, you're printing for a previous end of month. So last end of month or last year end or something like that, you'll use a historical A trial balance. Whereas the age trial balance and the trial balance with options give you the option of printing as at today's date. It always prints as at today's date. Okay, and we have the option of printing in summary or in detail. Right, there's the exclusion area, so you can select if you want to exclude fully paid documents, which usually we might want to, fully paid, no activity, and zero balance customers. I already have a range here, and I will print the screen. So this is printing my detailed report for this small range that I've selected. And this is what our age trial balance looks like. These are our agent buckets. There are 4 agent buckets specified here. And sorry, that was our summary. Now I'll print the detail. All right, so this is our detail. It shows all of the documents still outstanding or those that have been partially paid. And agent totals at the bottom of each customer's report. Okay, so that brings us towards the end of our accounts receivable webinar. I am going to be staying on the line for a few minutes in case you all have any questions. And if there are any questions, please type in the chat box. There should either be a Q&A box or a chat box where you can type your questions. Okay, so you may not have audio. So if there are questions, please type in the chat or the QA box. Okay, so Omar is asking how can he get access to previous sessions. Omar, please send an email to us at operations@optimus.guru, and we'll be able to provide you access with all those sessions that were missed previously. And yes, there is a recording. Okay, so I'll just hold on briefly again in case there are any more questions. Omar, just a reminder, the email address he's sending to is operations@optimus.guru. And operations also has your information, and I'm sure someone is on the session, so they should be able to send you that information. Okay, and Christina as well is requesting a recording. So if operations can send a recording to Christina as well. Okay, so usually all our webinar videos are published on YouTube, but we'll send you links to it. Okay, so thanks everyone and have a great day. Thank you for your time, for attending. If you feel that your organization needs some training in accounts receivables, or you need to deploy accounts receivable or any other area in GP, please feel free to reach out to us at operations@optimus.guru. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.